You know those small towns where everyone knows everyone? Where the local diner hands you coffee in chipped mugs, stained with years of use, and your name practically etched into the ceramic. A place where neighbors don't just wave. They'll be at your door before you even know you need them. Generations of families rooted deep, their histories tangled like old tree roots beneath cracked sidewalks. That's where I live. Sounds cozy, right? Sure, it's rustic, hell. I'm lucky if the internet doesn't cut out mid-sentence. But it's home. A quiet little corner of nowhere, where time feels like it's frozen in place. Except when the sun goes down. Because the nights don't belong to us. I've spent my whole life here, thinking there was no place I'd rather be. But that was before I understood what really lurks in the dark. This town wears its quirks like an old sweater, familiar, harmless. But there's one thread you don't pull, one truth we all pretend isn't there. Every night, without fail, when the clock strikes 11:38 p.m., the town shuts down. Not in the way most towns do. Not just the flickering of neon signs going dark or streets emptying out. No, this is something else. This is survival. Doors slam with desperate force, bolted, chained, and barred like they're the only thing keeping hell itself at bay. Windows shudder against their frames before locking themselves tight, the glass trembling as if it's afraid. And every single person knows the rule. Be inside. Stay inside. No matter what's out there. No one says. No one has to. Because deep down, we all feel it. An unnatural silence spreads over the streets, heavy and suffocating, pressing against the walls of every house. It's not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping town. It's the silence of something waiting, watching, listening. You never see it, not really, but you feel it like invisible fingers scraping along your spine. You know something is out there, just beyond the edge of the dark. And then, exactly 12 minutes later, it's gone. Just like that, as if it was never there at all. I've always wondered, why 11:38? Why not midnight? Why not random? But here, questions are dangerous. People don't talk about it. If they do, it's in hushed whispers, like words themselves might summon it. They'll tell you it's just the way things are. It's been happening longer than anyone can remember. But I remember. I know better, because I've seen it. I was 10, maybe 11, too young to understand, but old enough to disobey. I'd stayed up late, flashlight tucked under my blanket, flipping through pages of my favorite comics. My parents had warned me, like every parent warns their kids here, go to bed early. If you wake up, don't leave your room. Don't open the windows. Don't open the door. Ever. But I didn't listen. I wasn't asleep. I was wide awake, following the rules like I always did. Doors locked, windows shut, lights dimmed. But then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the walls like a pulse, low, guttural, almost alive. A hum, but deeper, something primal. It felt like the house itself was trembling, like the wood and nails were afraid. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window, heart pounding, breath shallow. I shouldn't have looked. God, I shouldn't have looked. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just darkness swallowing the pavement. But there was something, not a person, not an animal, something wrong. It didn't move like anything I'd ever seen before. Its motions were sharp, twitchy, like a puppet with tangled strings. It jerked forward, then sideways, as if gravity wasn't sure how to hold it. My eyes struggled to focus, my vision blurring at the edges like my brain refused to process it fully. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did, and I could feel it, not just see it, feel it. A gnawing hunger radiated from it, seeping through the glass, crawling over my skin like invisible insects. It wasn't just hungry for food. It was hungry for something else. Something deeper, darker. My stomach twisted in knots. My head throbbed. And before I knew it, it was gone. Just like that. As if it had never been there. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, my face pressed against the cold glass, staring at nothing. A hypnotic daze. When I finally snapped out of it, the clock read just before midnight. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. But I never forgot. Years passed. I didn't see it again, but every night at exactly 11:38 p.m., when the town seals itself shut, I knew it was out there. We all do. We just pretend. We pretend like we have a strict curfew. We pretend like there's nothing lurking in the dark. But we know better. Some people forget. They think it's just old superstition, a small-town legend. They get bold, careless. They leave windows cracked open, doors unlocked. Those of us still here, we understand. Whatever it is, it's hunting, stalking, waiting for the smallest mistake, a sliver of opportunity, a gap in the armor. Disappearances aren't rare here, not for a town this small. The police put on a show when it's an outsider, search parties, press releases, the whole routine. But when it's one of us, it's quieter. Families don't get sympathy, they get blame. You should have known better. That's the unspoken rule. I've often wondered why it's so brief. Why only 12 minutes? Why not longer? But those are questions without answers. By 11:50 p.m., it's over. The streets go still, the night settles, and life pretends to be normal again. But it's not normal. It never was. People have adapted. They lock their doors, shut their blinds, and convince themselves it's just another night. I once asked my parents why we didn't just leave. Why not move somewhere far away, somewhere safe? They looked at me with tired eyes and said, "It wouldn't matter. We have to endure. It has to be here. It's safer for everyone if it's here. Safer for everyone. Except us." It never made sense. How could it be safer if people kept disappearing? How could this be home when something monstrous prowled just outside our doors? I couldn't accept it. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. And then, not long ago, I saw it again. It was a night like any other, or at least as normal as nights get around here. I was getting ready for bed when I noticed Quincy, my cat, wasn't around. I called for him, checked his usual hiding spots. Nothing. The house felt emptier without him. Then I heard it. A faint sound. Not from inside, but outside. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I crept to the window. My heart sank. Quincy was outside. Quincy must have slipped out earlier when I'd come home. Unnoticed, now strutting along the cracked sidewalk like he owned it. Completely oblivious to the nightmare that was minutes away from waking. I glanced at the clock. 11:36 p.m. My stomach twisted. I didn't know if it cared about animals. Maybe it didn't. But I wasn't about to find out. I called out, my voice sharp and desperate, slicing through the thickening night. Quincy didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, his tail flicking with indifference. He'd never been outside before. He didn't understand what was coming. Panic overtook reason. I bolted out the door, barefoot, heart pounding, adrenaline drowning out the screaming warnings in my head. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cool night air burning my lungs. I reached him, scooped him up, and that's when I felt it. A shift in the air, a pressure, like the entire night exhaled around me, crushing down on my chest. Quincy's ears flattened against his skull, and he hissed, a sound more feral than I'd ever heard from him. My body locked up, paralyzed mid-step. The warmth drained from my skin, leaving nothing but cold, prickling fear. I turned my head, inch by inch, my neck stiff like rusted hinges. It was there, but it wasn't the same as before. No, this time it was bigger. Not just physically, it felt larger, like its presence had bled into the very fabric of reality. It filled the street, pressed against the houses, seeped into the cracks of the pavement. The world around it seemed to warp, edges bending like heat waves rising from asphalt. I tried to move, couldn't. My legs were cemented to the ground, my lungs refusing to draw breath. Quincy squirmed violently in my arms, then leapt free, darting back toward the house. He was fast, faster than I'd ever seen him move. I wanted to follow, but I was rooted in place, caught in its gravity. And then it saw me, its head, if you could call it that, twisted in my direction with a motion so unnatural, it made my stomach lurch. Its face, or the mockery of one, shifted, features blurring, melting, reforming into something almost human, but grotesquely wrong. Eyes where eyes shouldn't be, a mouth stretched too wide, filled with rows of teeth that didn't belong in any earthly jaw. Our gazes met, and a scream ripped from my throat, raw and uncontrollable. That broke the spell. I ran, blind, breathless, stumbling over my own feet. I ran. My heart thundered so violently it felt like my ribs would snap under the pressure. Behind me, I heard it. Not footsteps, something worse. A wet, slapping sound, like flesh dragging across pavement. A grotesque rhythm, irregular and eager. And then it roared. Not a sound meant for human ears. A noise that shook the ground beneath me, rattled my bones, and filled the night like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. I'd never known pure terror until that moment. Not the kind that digs into your marrow and stays there. I didn't think I'd make it. I veered sharply into an alley, collapsing against the cold brick wall, chest heaving. My hands trembled uncontrollably, fingers clawing at the rough surface, trying to anchor myself to something real. I didn't dare peek. I didn't dare breathe. Then the screams started. Not mine, theirs. High-pitched, guttural, filled with the kind of terror that only comes when death is staring you down. I wanted to help, to look, to do something, but I couldn't move, couldn't risk it. The screams didn't last long. Sharp, violent, then nothing. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't the peaceful quiet after danger passes. No, it was heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I pressed myself tighter against the wall, shrinking into the darkness, praying to be invisible. Every creak, every rustle in the shadows felt like it was reaching for me. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting each shaky breath, waiting, hoping for the nightmare to end. Eventually, I heard it move again, but this time it was leaving. No footsteps, just the faint, sickening sound of something massive slipping away into the dark. And then it was gone, but the horror didn't leave with it. Even when the clock struck 11:50 p.m. and the night settled back into its eerie stillness, it lingered, etched into my skin, carved into my mind. Because even though it was over, I knew it would come back. The streets had gone quiet again, swallowed by that familiar, suffocating stillness. But my nerves refused to settle. Every step I took toward home felt like I was racing against some unseen force, as if the darkness itself might reach out and pull me back. When I finally stumbled onto my porch, Quincy was there, waiting. His pupils were wide, tail puffed, trembling with the same fear that gripped me. The moment I cracked the door open, he bolted inside, vanishing into the shadows like even he couldn't bear the night pressing against his fur. I slammed the door shut behind us, twisting every lock until my fingers ached. I was alive. Shaken, yes, but alive. But that wasn't enough. Because whatever that thing was, it didn't belong here. Not in this world, not in this reality. Just thinking about it made my skin crawl. Its presence wasn't something you simply saw. It invaded your mind, twisted your thoughts, left a residue behind, like a stain on your soul. No one knew where it came from. Maybe its origins were buried in time, lost beneath layers of forgotten history. Or maybe it was older than history itself, something that never belonged but never left, because it was still there, always there, lurking in the shadows. Eventually, I did what you're probably screaming at me to do. I left, packed what little I had and ran. I didn't just move to the next town over. No, I fled to the biggest city I could find, thinking that if I drowned myself in neon lights and the endless hum of human activity, I could finally escape. My parents tried to stop me. They told me I couldn't leave, that I shouldn't leave. Their fear was different from mine, like they were scared of something I couldn't understand. But I didn't care. I was desperate. I waited until the early morning, when the sky was still bruised with traces of night, and slipped away while they were still asleep. I didn't look back. At first, it felt like freedom. The city was loud, chaotic, alive. The constant noise, the blaring horns, the distant chatter, the mechanical pulse of urban life was like armor, shielding me from the quiet that had once betrayed me. I melted into the crowd, faceless, anonymous, felt good. I thought I'd left the nightmare behind, that whatever it was, it couldn't follow me here, that it was just a memory, a dark chapter one could close. I was wrong. My new apartment was a small studio on the 5th floor, cozy with just enough space to feel like mine. The window overlooked the busy street below, far enough from the ground that I could finally glance outside without my stomach knotting in fear. But last night, that fragile illusion shattered. It was my first night there. The clock on the nightstand glared 11:28 p.m. in cold, digital red. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was safe now, that whatever haunted my hometown was locked there, buried in the past. But fear has a way of lingering, doesn't it? Like a shadow that never truly disappears. And as the minutes ticked by, I realized I wasn't alone. By 11:38 p.m., the city outside my window had fallen into an unnatural silence. The comforting hum of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the faint echoes of late-night laughter, all gone, swallowed by a stillness so thick it pressed against the glass like an invisible weight. My apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a fragile box suspended in the dark. I tried to focus on the magazine in my lap, but the words blurred, my eyes drifting drawn toward the window. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse, alive with something unseen. It's just in your head, I told myself. Just paranoia. Then I heard it. A soft, tentative tap against the window pane. My heart stuttered, then raced. The magazine slipped from my trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor with a whisper of pages. Nothing, just the oppressive silence pressing in. Again, louder this time, more insistent. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My gaze locked on the thin veil of the curtain, hiding whatever waited on the other side. The darkness beyond it wasn't empty. I could feel it, like it was watching me. Then came the scratching, a faint, delicate sound, like claws gently dragging across glass. The noise pierced through me, colder than ice. I knew that sound, knew it like I knew the beating of my own heart. It was a sound that didn't belong in the city. Legs trembling, I stood, my body screaming to turn back, to hide, to pretend I never heard it. But I had to look. I had to. My fingers brushed the curtain. I hesitated, breath shallow and ragged. Then, with a shaky pull, I drew it back. I will never forget what I saw. Perched on the fire escape outside my 5th floor window was it. The creature. Its grotesque form was silhouetted against the thin sliver of moonlight, a twisted mockery of anything natural. Limbs too long, joints bending in impossible ways, as though reality itself struggled to contain it. Its skin seemed to ripple, shifting like liquid shadow, never quite holding a solid shape. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me. Glowing orbs of sickly, unnatural light, boring into mine with an intelligence that was far worse than mindless hunger. It knew me. Its gaze felt like fingers slipping into my skull, sifting through memories, unraveling sanity. I tried to scream, but my voice died in my throat. A fragile, useless thing. The creature tilted its head, studying me with morbid curiosity. Then, slowly, its maw unhinged, stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows upon rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. A sound spilled from that abyss. Not a growl, not a roar, but something worse. A low, guttural vibration that rattled the glass, shook my bones, and filled the room with a darkness deeper than the absence of light. That sound snapped me out of my paralysis. I stumbled backward, finally finding my voice. A raw, desperate scream tearing from my lungs. The creature's form distorted, blurring like smoke caught in a violent wind, seeping through the window's edges, though the glass remained unbroken. Then everything went black. When I woke, hours, maybe minutes had passed. I don't know. But I know one thing with sickening certainty. It's not over. I thought I had escaped. Thought the city's bright lights and crowded streets could shield me from the nightmare. But you can't outrun something that isn't bound by walls, by borders, by reason. And then I remembered my parents' words. Their haunted faces when I asked why we never left. It's safer for everyone if it's here. They weren't talking about us. They meant everyone else. They stayed not because they were trapped. They endured, sacrificing their safety to keep it contained, to keep it from spreading. And now I've set it loose. I brought it here, to a city teeming with life, with people who have no idea what's coming. Over 1 million souls, unaware that the darkness they trust to be harmless is now something far worse. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please, for your own safety, lock your doors. Shut your windows. Stay inside between 11:38 p.m. and 11:50 p.m. But deep down, I fear it's already too late.